Hi, everybody. So this week I'm introducing this thing called linear perspective. This is a big unit that we cover, and I'm excited that I'm finding a way to figure out how to do it online. It might be a bit tricky. There's things about it that can be difficult to understand as you start drawing using this idea of drawing in perspective, but hopefully we will go through this journey together doing remote learning, and we'll still be able to make sure that you can succeed and get the bones of being able to draw more successfully in terms of drawing in perspective. So I keep saying linear perspective. What does that mean to you when I say that? I'm just going to pause for a second, let you think about that. Okay, so it is a system for representing three-dimensional space on a flat surface. That's a very broad, basic definition. We're going to get into more detail through this presentation in this video, so you start to understand what it looks like and the vocabulary and what the pieces are and the rules that you need to actually be able to draw basically anything you want in perspective correctly. So why use it? That's the question. Why not just look at things and say, okay, I'm just going to look at it and just draw it as best I can? Well, here's why we might use it. Because, again, that brain problem of my brain kicks in and it doesn't let me see accurately what's really going on. So in this drawing, what do you think this is a drawing of? Take a moment and think about that. You might have a couple of guesses. Some of you might say it's a ladder, some of you might say it's railroad tracks, some of you might say it's some weird just geometric stacking block thing. So if you said railroad tracks, you're correct. By the way, all those answers I've gotten in previous classrooms before, so I'm quoting from students in terms of when I ask these questions in class. So here is what this drawing really is. It is railroad tracks. But what's happening here and not happening, that's happening here. So what's happening here is that we are drawing in perspective. It's like I'm standing on the railroad tracks looking far off into the distance, and this is how they look. Here, same thing, except this is the brain getting in the way. The brain is dictating what we know railroad tracks look like as we look down on them, not what happens as they get farther and farther away from us off into the distance. So first, as we move through this presentation of slides, we're going to look at where does this idea come from. So linear perspective comes from the Renaissance. It comes out of that time when people were really starting to look at the world and ask in-depth questions about why, how, and why. So we have science and math coming on board along with philosophy and art. So these two Italian architects and artists come together, and Brunelleschi does an experiment where he's trying to figure out how to draw architecture accurately as he's looking at it on that flat piece of paper. Because up until this point, there were attempts made to do that, but there still were problems, and no one had come up with rules or a system to do that. And he thought, well, why not? Why can't we figure out what the rules are? And that's exactly what these two did. So before they published their book, they wrote a book together, and artists are kind of out there just trying to make sense of the world and show that in any sort of painting or drawing. They were doing things like this. So at first glance, it might seem, hey, these are pretty fun and cool, but the question to ask is what's happening in these paintings in terms of the space, how they're trying to show depth of space and using the space and trying to draw man-made objects like walls, seats, pulpits, columns, towers, buildings, even fences in this image. Are these believable spaces? And if you start to unpack these images, you might start to be like, this doesn't make sense. So here we have this man sitting on this bench, and it's sloped at this very odd angle, and it looks like he's about to fall off. The pulpit is angled up at this strange angle upward. This is downwards. On this drawing, we have these bricks that start out in our foreground like they're the ground, and then they continue up, and our eye almost starts to think of them as like, well, wait, is this the wall behind her? But no, it's part of the ground. The same with the mat he's on. What is going on there? It looks like it's turned up, and I'm looking at it hanging on a wall as opposed to it's actually sitting on the ground. So all of the problems here are that it's not drawn in correct perspective, linear perspective. So now we're going to flip to an image where this is made in 1486. This is after that experiment and book is written on linear perspective. And look at this space. Ask yourself, is this believable? Does it seem like I could just walk into this space, walk behind the angel visiting Mary, and, oh no, sorry, that's not Mary, that's St. Emidus. And walk back, and there's a wall back there into a garden and a real sense of depth. This makes sense. So we're going to look at another artwork moving forward to the 1600s. This guy, this artist, wrote an entire book and did these are pen and ink drawings in perspective. Look at how accurate this is and the sense of space. You could just imagine walking through this and walking over that bridge and far off into the distance to this house way back there. It all, again, makes sense. Here's Van Gogh's bedroom, fast forwarding a bit. So again, even though it's painted in Van Gogh's style, you know, it's very playful and not realistic, but the use of perspective, the way he's drawing these pieces of furniture and objects in the room, it makes sense. Can you imagine walking into this room and sitting on this chair or hopping up on that bed? Absolutely. So now we're going to flip to a contemporary artist. This is a photorealist painter. Yes, this is a painter. And what I love about this, besides his incredible ability at photorealism, is his use of perspective. I mean, look at how he's just absolutely nails it. Look at the details of the windows. They get closer and closer together and start to almost disappear, but our mind still knows they're windows. But that's what happens as things get farther away in terms of what it actually looks like when you're drawing in perspective. Kind of cool. All right, so let's get to the nuts and bolts of what perspective is. So linear perspective, this is a more detailed definition. It is a system for creating an illusion of depth on that flat surface, whether it's a painting, a drawing, an ink drawing, whatever it is you're doing. All parallel lines of the sides of buildings, railroad tracks, even if it's a fence going back in space, all of them would use a system where they're going back on a diagonal to this line we're going to define in a second in our picture plane on the horizon line. So first we're going to look at this image, right? We've got these railroad tracks. I already mentioned a few things about this. It's a basic shot. We've got the picture plane. That is your frame. This is my picture plane. There might be things happening beyond it as I'm standing on these railroad tracks. If I was actually standing here, I would see past this, but this is the border I gave myself to make this drawing. So the next thing we're going to define is this, the horizon line. I've already kind of stated there it is, but what is that specifically? Now you guys probably know it as, all right, well, Miss Lovell, that's where the land meets the sky. Could be the sea or land. There could be mountains in the background, but it's really kind of where that valley is and where it's really meeting right there. That's true, but there's also another thing to keep in mind that's very, very important, and it's this, that it also is your eye level. So the horizon line is also how your eyes are cutting across this scene. And if we're in the classroom and we're inside, you can't see that, right? You know, we're not looking at the sky. So you're going to imagine laser beams shooting from your eye, cutting across the space you're in. That would be your horizon line across your picture plane. So those are two very important terms that we're going to use for this unit. Now we're going to look at this idea of a vanishing point and orthogonals. The vanishing point is where all these parallel lines, everything going back in space away from you, meets at a single point. Think of it like you're driving down the road and you see that road far off in the distance. Do the two lines stay parallel, or do they slowly meet to a single point? This is the way our eye works. We see things converging at a single point. So we have our horizon line, but then we have this, where my eyes are directly focusing to this one spot, which is our vanishing point. The orthogonals are any diagonal lines that can be drawn, where we have things that are very close to us, but then they continue back in space. Those are called orthogonals. So the railroad tracks would have to start at me, where I see them spaced out, but then they recede back to a single vanishing point. Because I want to avoid getting that image at the beginning of our PowerPoint, the ladder that's just drawn straight up the picture plane. And I want to get to the realistic railroad tracks where the two rails actually are diagonals that meet at this vanishing point. So this is a basic overview of the parts of perspective, the vocabulary you're going to need to help you start to do your drawing exercises. So tomorrow you're going to start by drawing just some basic forms in perspective to start to get a grasp on drawing things in perspective for accuracy. I will post this PowerPoint separate from turning it into a video for you to be able to review if you just need that extra support help. So hope you guys are all doing well, miss you, and good luck.